Hello, 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 beautiful people. My name is Jacob Francisco Miranda. I'm an incoming professor at the California State University, East Bay, and I'm joined today by Julia.
Yes, I'm Julia Wolska. I'm a lecturer in psychology at Manchester Metropolitan University. And me and Jacob know each other because we are both part of FORRT Pedagogies. This is an initiative that hopes to open up educational resources and recognize outstanding teaching and mentoring.
Yep, exactly. And we have some special guests joining us today. We're joined by Dr. Jordan Waggy at Avila University. Dr. Waggy runs the Replication Open Science Education Lab, also known as the ROSE Lab, which I love the acronym. She's the executive director of CREP. It's a collaborative replications education project, and this organization serves to guide and support student replications of published research in psychology. And really, we're going to learn a lot about CREP today. We're also joined by some of her amazing students, Jasmine Beltran and Amy Hernandez, so we can learn more about their experiences as undergraduates with this organization. So I'd like to start. Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves and just really how did you get involved with open science generally, and then maybe more specifically with the organization CREP?
Yeah, that sounds like a me question. And then I'll kind of kick it around, popcorn it or whatever to Jasmine and Amy. I got involved with open science, I think, pretty naturally. I'm in, just for context, I'm in my, I think, 13th or 14th year of tenure track. But I went to graduate school in the mid 2000s, and I remember, you know, those first classes you teach are always like stats labs and methods labs, at least where I was. And I remember teaching, like, this is how you do this work, and this is like, you form a hypothesis ahead of time, and that's, you know, that's what makes it work. And then there were all of these places where I'm like, but we don't really do that in practice. And it felt hypocritical. It felt like, well, why don't we do those things in practice? And so I kind of naturally fit into this open science and transparency. Like, yeah, we need more people doing this. Now with CREP was already a thing by the time I found it. This is one of my favorite professional stories. I was like a baby academic and knew that I wanted to present at a teaching conference, and I reached out on a listserv for co-presenters on teaching how to teach research methods effectively. And specifically, the thing that I was interested in talking about was, or getting like audience input on and presenting on, was how to make the most of the time you have, because these classes are just jam-packed with not only content, but also skills that students need to come out of there with. So they need to maybe know what an independent variable is, but also they need to know how to use independent variables. And they also usually have some pretty intense department mandated learning outcomes. So they have to write an APA style in there. They usually have to have a presentation. So we have a whole list. We have the longest list of any class of learning outcomes that need to come out of there. And so I put this email out on this listserv, and one of my co-presenters was John Gray. And the angle that he took in this presentation was make the most of your time by doing something meaningful to the field. That students are using this energy on their research projects anyway, why not direct it towards something that is, you know, meaningful and that contributes to the field. And while he was working on that, Mark Brandt and Hans Eiserman were at Tilburg University, and they were really interested in doing replications with students, and so they got connected and started CREP. And I kind of hitchhiked and was just like, involve me. I want to do these things. This is super cool. And then John and I had a cage match. I'm just kidding. He handed the reins over to me, and that's where we are now. So, yeah.
No, I think maybe more things should be handled by cage matches. So definitely.
Yes.
And then for the students as well, so how did you all, like, are you involved with Dr. Waggy's class? Are you, like, how did you all kind of initially hear about CREP as well? Like, was it just part of like your class and you're like, all right, I guess we're doing this project, and like, what were your initial thoughts when you heard about it? Like, what was going through your mind?
We've had Dr. Waggy now basically for the year. So we started with our stats and methods class as a 2-semester class. And so last semester, we really just focused on, learning material, and we did a literature review. And this semester, we actually are diving in and doing a class CREP project. So that's how we we had heard about it before, but in terms of actually getting involved, it started this semester. And so basically we went through all of the steps. And right now we are still collecting data. And so that's what we're working on right now. But yeah, so as a class, we're just working on a project. That's how we got involved. We were forced, but but actually it was a good force. It's been a very fun and educating experience, I feel like, in my opinion.
I'll make sure to have that as a quote up front. We were forced. ...
Amy, do you think you have any thoughts to add?
Yeah, one additional thing, I am a part of Dr. Waggy's lab, and we are also currently doing a replication in that. So I've kind of have my double experience with working with CREP, a little bit from class and then a lot of it from the lab, which, yeah, we put it all together, sent our IRB stuff, and then now we're still like collecting data as of the moment. So
Okay, great, thank you. So I would now like to move on to the next question, if that's all right with you. So the next question would be, could you give a brief description of what CREP does and an overview of the process from selecting studies to publication?
I know that I can talk about them, from a student's perspective. So, CREP, the Collaborative Replications Education Project, it's a psychology research program which is designed to not only take on the replication crisis as a whole, but to provide a way for undergraduate students to gain that quality experience in the research process, which I think is super important, especially for people like myself who will be completing a senior thesis. It's important to kind of gain that experience before just diving right in. And I'm like, have really nothing, I have no idea how this process works. So first, CREP studies that are selected, they go through a process that involves a lot of people. The CREP team itself begins by gathering the most highly cited papers that were published exactly 3 years prior to the current year. So they look through the top cited journals of each of the 9 disciplines and then take these papers and rate them by how likely it would be for a student to have the ability to replicate it in just 1 semester. And then after that, executive reviewers make a final choice, and at which point the CREP team will begin to reach out to the original authors of the study because they want to be able to accumulate as many materials and suggestions as possible so they can generate as much constancy as possible. And then after that, do you want me to continue, Dr. Waggy, or?
Yeah, you're doing good. I'll jump in if I have something to add.
Okay, and then for the students process, so they're first introduced to CREP by the instructor at their institution. Then they create an OSF page together and they begin to assemble materials. So for example, the study that we're doing in our class, everybody did create an OSF page, the Open Science framework page, and then the CREP executive reviewer will review the project, or the students will begin working towards IRB approval. If resubmission is needed, then they will revise and resubmit, but the student teams then pre-register their page on the OSF and start collecting data. Once data is collected, or once data collection is complete, the writing up of the results and discussion will be done, and the OSF page and materials are submitted along with a completion pledge. And then finally, once receiving final approval, the students are emailed completion certificates. And when enough data has been collected, students are invited by the CREP team to contribute to the meta-analysis manuscript, ideally in the first author position, which, as we all know, is a pretty big deal, especially for an undergraduate student.
Yeah, that's great. Jasmine nailed it. And there's a publication, so Waggy et al. 2019. We have a flow chart that shows how the process works from the instructor and student side. Usually people kind of either want to know, well, how do you select your studies? And how, like, what is the process of you getting these projects ready to go? Or they want to know about like the instructor and student side of things. And I think Jasmine did a good job of summarizing all of those. We have a step-by-step manual as well that walks the student through that side pretty closely.
That makes sense to me. So it seems like there's a review process. You kind of really went into good detail about like how studies are selected within a 3-year time frame. I think the only kind of clarification question I would want to know is like towards the end of it, so like maybe towards the end product of if someone runs a replication study, like where does, I guess, like the publication aspect lead into it? So like, does a lab individually get to publish like their own thing by volunteering for CREP? Is it they've now kind of like done this replication for CREP and now it's going to be part of a larger publication? Is every study guaranteed to publish? So like, I guess more of the curiosity about the end process. So maybe Dr. Wegge, you have more of like that knowledge of like, once the students have done like a good chunk of the front end to middle, like what happens towards the end?
Right. And this has kind of been all over the place. So we have, of the 19 studies that were originally selected, and I think maybe 14 or 15 that collected data, we have 3 that have been published all the way. One of them has a student first author. One of them I'm working on writing up with Lily Lazarevic right now, and has around, I think, 30 authors. And that one we started in 2013, I think. It depends on a variety of factors. So one factor is, we have a couple studies that just never got that much data. So the Cool et al. Is a really good example of that. That study, in order to run it, requires a MATLAB license. And you can't even really, there's like a free-ish kind of version of MATLAB called Octave, and it doesn't have like the modules you need to run this study. And so we have a lot of students from teaching schools who don't have access to MATLAB or the technical skills to use it. So we haven't collected a lot of data on that. We have the data, we stopped recruiting participants, or we stopped recruiting sites for it. We have the data if anybody is interested in like taking it and writing it up. Sometimes it's a case of needing a content area expert on that. So, and sometimes we just kind of wing it anyway. So like my first CREP publication, like my background is in visual psychophysics. That's where I got my PhD. Like I'm a cognitive psychologist. That's me. But the first CREP publication I first authored was the red romance effect, where like pictures of, and this is from the original paper, a moderately attractive young Latino man is surrounded by red or gray. And then in the original paper, women who are attracted to men find him more attractive when he's surrounded by red. That is so out of my wheelhouse. It's not like the parts that I got excited about were like these long emails back and forth between like Dr. Elliott and Hans Eiserman on like the chromaticity of the photographs, and like they had taken them to a print shop to get like the exact values of these colors checked. And I'm like, oh, that's very nerdy and fun. But like the evolutionary psych and social psych stuff is like, I'm not a content expert in that. Somebody else probably could have written a better paper on that. So, so the problem, and then we also have these papers that, so we have this partnership paper with the Psych Science Accelerator. That was a registered report. Because of that process, it's not really a direct replication anymore. So teams that signed up to collect that data were guaranteed authorship, like if they did these steps. It took a little bit longer than we thought it was going to. So we're working on that a little bit. So the stars kind of have to align. We have to have enough data collected, which is like, we use rules of thumb. Like we always have tons of data. Most of the time we have tons of data. When we set out, we wanted to get at least 2.5 times the original sample size as a rule of thumb. We don't currently do power analyses ahead of time, which is something that we really should look at doing at some point, because it's just like we just always end up with a lot of data. So so if we have enough data, the study's been open for, you know, at least a year or two, we like to give people warning that the study is going to end at a certain point because people are like writing up their syllabi and planning on doing these as projects. So we have everyone open for at least a year and a half, 2 years. And then if we have a content expert who is willing to step forward and write it up or help mentor a student, then those stars, if those stars align, like we'll move forward with publication, and we're working on getting that more sort of streamlined. Now, in the meantime, individual sites, there's nothing stopping them from publishing their data. It's not, we're not gonna, but we ask them to maybe publish their extension hypotheses. So sites can gather extension hypothesis data, and we ask them, you can publish that. If they end up publishing their own sites data without extension hypotheses, it's fine. Like that's a good outcome. And we just, when we go to submit the big paper later, we'll just be like, yes, some of this data was previously published in another paper. It's fine. It's really fine. Especially since we don't know how many years it's going to take for us to get our big publication out. So one of the things we've been talking about doing also, I have been talking about it while other people listen to me talk about it, is instead of when we finish a project, like right away doing a data paper. And data papers, Jasmine, Amy, I don't know if I've really talked to you much about what these are, but these are papers where you just present data, really, and you're not focusing as much on the content. You're like, a data paper for CREP would be like, here's what CREP is, here's one of the projects we did, here's the data from it, here's how we processed it and cleaned it, here are some things you can do with it. And so then that data would be available for a content expert to come along and write that paper, or somebody who's been involved in CREP. And I think that that's probably a good option for involving people. We're trying to get better at this. And I have some more thoughts to add on that if we get to publication around a little bit later.
Nice. And I think our next question kind of can maybe leads a little bit more into it. Maybe you can elaborate there and expand. But particularly you talked about the Psychological Science Accelerator, or PSA. I know for the undergrads, like this is alphabet soup, right? You have like the FORRT, the PSA, the CREP, the ROSE. It's fun to keep track of all these letters and names. But there's a lot of big team science, which also has this acronym BTS, projects that try to do these large scale replications. And I think that what makes y'all's organization CREP really stand apart from the rest is the emphasis on teaching and mentoring, is the emphasis on how do we get undergraduate students involved into the process. And so since we were kind of just talking about the publication process, I guess you kind of almost had two sections of these labs, these independent labs that work with CREP can maybe independently publish their own work if they would like to. And I can imagine that undergraduate students in authorship might be like left to whoever's leading that lab and how they want to run it. But I was kind of curious, like, one, do you give recommendations to labs of like how they should include undergraduates in the authorship process, if at all? And two, you also have this distinction of like these big CREP papers that are going to be like in the long run, is like every lab and every undergrad, like I guess the general question is like, how is authorship discussed and decided, and like where do students fall? Because I feel like generally in academia that's always a big talk of like, well, did you collect data? Well, is collecting data alone really merit for authorship? But the whole point or the spirit of CREP is really about getting them this academic experience. So I don't know, kind of like with your philosophy of like, how do you envision it, or how have you seen it done?
Yeah, and I don't think we've had any single sites publish their own data. They've done some presentations. We kind of leave that up to them. I've thought about adding guidance on this. The way that I'm doing it in my lab is through in my class is through the OSF pages bibliography, sort of keeping track of, by default, we start out with the graduate assistant in the class is first author, I'm last author, and then everybody else is in alphabetical order. But then if people do certain things throughout the semester, they'll earn advanced authorship, much like something called the credit taxonomy. I haven't introduced this to my students, but it's this idea that there are multiple categories of things that you can do for authorship on a paper. And if you do like at least 2 of those things, that generally warrants authorship. And it's sort of similar to that. Like, okay, well, if whoever writes the best results section in the class, I'm going to post that on our page, and that will advance their authorship up the OSF page. And that OSF page will get cited in our publications, but then also any future meta-analyses that are done that are external. We have had that happen before. So now for the big manuscripts that get done, this isn't something that we've struggled much with. The paper I ended up writing up was in the hands of a couple students for a couple years, and then they kind of disappeared and like did the things people do, like they got lives, they had things that became important to them. And so eventually it was just like, we have to write this up. I just jumped in and, revised the work and kind of started over. Every paper we've had a couple students kind of hanging in there and just making themselves known. But I don't think we've done a great job yet of sort of extracting their participation from them. So ideally, what happens when we go to write these up is that we email and contact every person who has contributed data. We have ideally all of their contact information. In practice, you can guess how this has worked out. If their professors are still at the same institution, which often they aren't, sometimes they're at a different institution, sometimes they've left academia, the student's email addresses no longer work. We may not even have them to begin with. So this is the part of the impetus for us having a submission system be built as part of this grant we have, so we can get everybody's contact information in the system. And when we're ready for us to reach out to people, we can contact them, because that's just really the first big hurdle is how do I just reach out to people and let them know, hey, we are writing this thing up for publication and you are invited to participate. The other thing we're trying to do right now with the Griskavicius paper is we've reached out to all of these teams. We've diligently asked them to reach out to students who are involved in the project. We have all of this data. So remember when I was saying earlier that generally you need to do 2 things to get authorship on a paper. So students have collected data. We need to get them that other thing, which is typically, if you're going to contribute to just 2 levels, typically those things are collecting data and contributing to the manuscript. So what we do, but also students are kind of hesitant to contribute to manuscripts when it's out in like just a big Google Doc, and there are like people they know, people who have written their textbooks, they don't want to write things on comments when there are all of these other people like leaving comments. So for the Griskavicius, I always pronounce his name wrong, Griskavicius manuscript, we developed a survey, Qualtrics survey, and we sent the manuscript in that survey and said, did you contribute to multiple categories? If you didn't contribute to multiple categories, we asked that you leave comments on the manuscript. And if you don't want to leave comments on the manuscript, please read at least 2 sections out of the introduction, method, results, and discussion, and summarize each section, which helps us, like, are we getting the points across that we need? And is there anything you would take out? Is there anything you would add? And we just had our first round of reviews come in that way. And we had several students contribute that way. And that way we're kind of like pulling it out of them in like a guided kind of a way that's helpful to us, but also does earn them authorship. They did the job we asked them to do on contributing to this manuscript. We may not use everything that they say, but it has made the manuscript a lot better with some of the suggestions that they left. So I think we're going to see how this goes and see, what this process is like, and then get their feedback on this process, whether it helps them feel like they were contributing to authorship. and maybe look at trying to do this in future manuscripts as well. Long answer.
Yeah, thank you. That was really insightful. So my next question is a bit more general again, I guess. So basically, there are many aspects of open science that can be taught to students, but CREP focuses on replication, and we would just, rather than other aspects of open science that could be possibly also taught. So we would just like to ask you whether you could tell us why CREP chooses to focus on replication, and also what the benefits of this approach are.
Right. We could have done like the collaborative pre-registration education project, but CPEP didn't sound as good as CREP. So, I mean, I think the focus is on replication because student projects, and I don't want to sound negative about this at all, because I think that these can be really interesting. Student projects, when you teach research methods, are often not theory-based. And there's definitely some value of like having students figure out how they can test questions that are important to them empirically. Like I joke with my students that when students pick their own topics, it's always like pre-workout and sleep, or stress and sleep, or attachment styles and the big five. And those things are, they're interesting, but also they're often just, they're not theory based, and they aren't like sort of at the cutting edge of what people are doing. They're not, they can be, and again, I don't mean this in a negative way, pretty sloppy. My first project was extremely sloppy because I didn't know what I was doing. And, in other sciences, when people are learning like the tricks of the trade, they do replication, like they replicate things that thousands of other people have. Like, you don't have an intro chemistry student go into the lab and like give them hydrochloric acid and say like, find some science. Like, it's just not, you don't bring, students to a field and say like, form a hypothesis. So I think there's some value in having people follow the methods that have been established by scholars in the field, because they are often the most cutting edge. There are thousands of, well, I don't know thousands, there are hundreds of depression inventories, but if you do a CREP replication, you may replicate a paper that has the most commonly used, depression inventory, and think through the rationale of why they use that and follow in their exact methods. The other learning goals, are things like understanding one paper on a really deep level, I think is good. Being able to closely match published methods, but then also see how difficult it is to match published methods. Like the questions we have come up when we actually get in there and do this are like things like, oh, what are we going to title this on Sona when we recruit participants? What did the original authors title? That's not in their paper. It's not in the stuff they sent us. What makes a good title? How much should we tip these students? And it's just a small thing. It's like, it's not the kind of thing you think about until you're like in there doing it. At least, well, it's not the kind of thing I think about until you're in there doing it. But that does cover a lot of ground. Some of those benefits are things that we are actively testing. Some of them are kind of our intuition. It also, kind of seems like, and maybe Jasmine and Amy can speak better to this, but it seems like students get kind of excited about the replications, like the different options that we have to replicate.
Yeah, no, I honestly, like, that was one of my favorite class periods, was whenever we went over all of like, I think it was 5 or 6 options, might have been more.
It's okay.
About different studies that we could do. And it gives us you know, it just kind of gives us the freedom. So it's like, maybe we didn't come up with this idea by ourselves. We still had some say in what we were going to replicate. So like that was exciting about it. And then just in general, just getting the experience, because like you said, I feel like before doing this, it was kind of like you said, like, I really don't know what to do. You just kind of, you know, do it, you know, good luck. And so I've really appreciated the experience and being able to participate in CREP, because it allowed me to acquire that knowledge that I wouldn't have had before.
Perfect sense for me. So like providing some sort of scaffolding, kind of almost like an apprenticeship model. And I think you all kind of touched upon this, but I think it's kind of maybe good to elaborate. So for Dr. Waggy, could you tell us a little bit more about like, with this replication focus, like, do you have specific like learning goals or learning outcomes in mind, where if undergraduate students are participating, you do want them to get this out of it, like these kind of concrete goals? And then Jasmine, you kind of already kind of hinted as well, and then Amy, if either of you all like to expand, but what did you all personally take away from this experience? So like, there's the official learning goals, there is still the experience that you're currently going through this, right? So you're still like getting an experience out of this, but were there things that you both like expected or were unexpected that you felt like were valuable to you, that, you know, are guiding you in the future, or just like a lifelong skill?
I don't know how to like better like word it, but I was terrible at APA coming into this. And now I'm better at it. Although it gives me anxiety to do, it gives me less anxiety to do now. So that's like one of the actual skills that I can like list off that isn't super ambiguous, is learning how to write better in APA. I think another thing that I'd learned is just not being scared to communicate with like faculty members about like any like help or just like questions. I don't know. I was like always so intimidated by talking to like people who were like, I guess like in a higher position than me. I don't know how to better explain that, but yeah. So that's kind of like gone for me now, but that's all I can really say. That was the unexpected. That was the unexpected.
I think that the writing is a big thing, like not only being able to write in APA, because from like, I feel like the beginning of my academic career, I've had to write in APA format. And so it wasn't necessarily the APA, but, you know, you're reading these papers with these different sections. And especially whenever you're first being exposed, you're like, okay, oh, wow, like the format's weird, like results, discussion, limitations, like what is this? And so, you know, the more papers you read, and then actually being able to participate in the CREP study, because like she said, you know, some people do certain things, they might get like higher authorship or, however, everybody still does everything. And so you're basically, every single person is basically conducting this replication, like not necessarily on their own, but everybody is contributing to every single part. And so I just think, again, it's really the exposure. And now, you know, the next time I pick up a paper, or even, I mean, I constantly am now at this point, but it's like, okay, I understand this. I know how to write like this. I know how to format like this. And so it just really, what it does is it boosts your confidence, which I feel like is a super big thing that you need being in the research field. You have to be able to have confidence, because I feel like most of us, especially at this point in our, you know, like academic professional career, we don't want to sound stupid, right? We feel like we want to know what we're talking about. And so it just kind of like gives you that extra, I've done this before. So the next time I do it, it will only get easier and easier and easier. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, but I know something now that I didn't know before. And so practice makes perfect, you know.
And I should clarify a little bit about how I run this in my class. When I use CREP, and you can set it up a lot of different ways, the whole class does the same project. It used to be in the past, I would pick the project before the semester starts. Now I go through the ones that I'm willing to supervise, and I let them vote on which one they want to do. And I also tell them, if you have your heart set on one that we didn't end up choosing, like you could do it off on the side as like your alternative to the project the class is doing. And then we're all on the same OSF page. They all write their own papers, but they have very specific prescriptive sections that need to be included that are, yeah. But the question about learning outcomes, I think, is a really good question. And this is something that we are starting to dedicate a little bit more time to. CREP has always been just a model that you can apply to meet your own learning outcomes in your course. So whatever those are. I know that our department learning outcomes follow pretty closely APA 2.0. And so, and I think a lot of departments are probably the same way. Learning outcomes like describe the fundamental principles of research design, discuss the value of experimental design, but then there are also, sort of professional development, science as a process types of things. And I'm trying to think, there's one that's just like design or replicate a study. And yeah, just replicate or design and conduct simple scientific studies to confirm a hypothesis based on operational definitions. Some departments really like mandate that you must meet this learning outcome. You must have students design a study. Some don't. And so we want it to be flexible to where this project can meet multiple learning outcomes. But one of the things that I'm working on over the summer is writing learning outcomes, taking some of those APA learning outcomes, putting them into something like a Canvas page that I can then export and share with other people, and have where there are assignments that would align with those different outcomes that instructors can pick or choose from. And so they can go into this like, okay, which of these match the learning outcomes that I have for my course? And so which things would I want to include from this? So if it's a learning outcome for my course that students do an IRB application, which is rare, but I have seen before, then here's an exercise where you can guide your students through an IRB application. But you don't have to do that with your class if that's not one of your learning outcomes.
Okay, great. So my next question would be, it's directed towards the three of you basically. So what are students' initial reactions when they start with a replication project? And what are some of the major challenges they might face? And maybe Jasmine and Amy can tell us specifically what their experience was when they started with CREP.
Okay, so whenever we first started, again, it's the knowledge aspect of it. And I was kind of intimidated, me myself. I'm just like, oh gosh, I don't know how this is going to be like this semester. I feel like this is going to be kind of hard. I kind of was like talking myself down, honestly. And then just as we continued to move through, what I really liked about it was that we move through each step, like not necessarily slowly, but we spend a good amount of time so we understand each step of the process. And we can really actually get like the best experience out of each step. And so like now where I feel like I am is like we'll be starting my thesis next semester, and I feel like this experience has definitely prepared me for that. I'm not really super nervous about it. And then again, the writing aspect, I really think just that's the best, the best thing that I personally got out of it.
I would agree. Coming into this, knowing that I was doing an empirical report this semester for this class, and like finding out that it was going to be a replication for CREP, I was definitely intimidated and a little bit overwhelmed, thinking about like the future. Like, I'm not going to know how to do this. I'm not going to know how to do that. The first time I ever tried to do an empirical report, it was terrible, and it like catastrophic and everything. And there were definitely, I guess, the challenges that I feel like me and like many others faced was actually trying to, I don't know, like not be scared to make mistakes. I know that a lot of us are very like wanting to be perfect going into it. And so that kind of like stops us from like going on. I don't know if I can better explain that, but yeah.
The next question I have is more directed for you, Dr. Waggy. So you can imagine now that, not from like a student perspective, but like you can even imagine me. I'm an instructor, I'm going to be in East Bay. I'm teaching like a methods course or maybe like an advanced course. And I'm like, I'm really into replication. I want to run a replication for my students, provide that scaffolding. But I've heard of this organization, CREP, that does something similar. And so I kind of have like one of two options. I can run this student-led replication on my own as a silo, right? Or I can work with CREP. So like if there was this person out there, if there's like someone who's listening in and they're just kind of wondering what would be the advantages of working with CREP versus like me kind of going solo and kind of doing things on my own. So like does the organization, like what benefits can it provide to instructors that you think may be lacking, or like to help them avoid pitfalls that they may face if they just try to like randomly start this type of process on their own?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there's so much to prepare for this class. So some of the benefits of CREP, I think, are things that you could also use if you were going rogue. I mean, I think having that structure and having the guidance for students and eventually like assignments that go along with it, I think is helpful. Having pre-selected, we do have a lot of materials that are already created that like, tutorial videos on using the OSF and the step-by-step guide. And we also have external reviewers. So I think that that's been really helpful for people. Sometimes they take a little bit longer than the timeline is for like whatever class you're in, like especially this time of the semester. If somebody submits for a review like in April or May, a lot of times it takes us like maybe 2 weeks instead of 1 week to get back to people. But it is nice to have that like from someone else. No, you need to improve your project in these ways. So the instructor doesn't have to see all of the different projects. They can kind of leave the students to do that on their own. And other things are things like, well, you can look at other people's OSF pages to see like how they filled out their IRB applications. You know that they're pretty straightforward and innocuous for IRB. This is, I think, is a huge advantage for just replications in general, is instead of needing to sort of like poorly supervise 20 different student projects on the relationship between stress and memory, or whatever it is like they're picking, you have a limited number of papers that you can sort of know really well, which I think is nice. But then involvement with CREP, I try to frame this as advantageous for people. It is a professional network. It is, you are building relationships. If you're a reviewer, you're building relationships with your executive reviewer and with the core team. If you are an instructor, you're getting sort of involved in this network. I mean, I've written a lot of letters for people who have been involved in CREP before, letters to their, to their promotion and tenure committee, just explain, sometimes letters of recommendation, but also sometimes letters that just explain, this is why teaching with replication is important, because a lot of times P&T committees aren't as educated on that as they should. Even if they have psychology members, not even psychology departments are sometimes like, why would you just have them replicate something? Like they should be doing their own original research. That's exactly what their voices sound like. I'm just kidding. So,
Yeah.
So that's nice, I think. And then you also, and I think this is a carrot. This has been a carrot for people particularly at the small teaching schools. You do have something that you can add for authorship, right? So at teaching schools, it is really hard to maintain your own independent line of research when you're teaching, 3 or 4 classes a semester. But if you are doing these replications as part of the CREP network, even if your students, don't end up contributing to that manuscript, you can as the instructor. jump onto that manuscript as well. But all of that being said, you know, anybody who's interested in doing replications with students, I mean, do it your way. If you have an 8-week class and you don't have time to do the IRB, or you don't have time to do the CREP review process, look at the materials, look at the step-by-step guide, download a copy, adapt it to whatever it is you need. It's in the spirit of openness. If you can make it work for you in a way that doesn't like interface with CREP, go for it. I think the major benefit of staying with CREP is that authorship, contributing to like the big picture, having like a well-powered study. But you could do the same replication in your class over multiple semesters and still contribute, you know, to a manuscript with a well-powered study. So if you have enough students, you probably could do it in one semester. I don't, but you know, you probably will.
What are some of the different ways in which instructors can incorporate the work with CREP into their teaching or mentoring? So, for example, if they want to incorporate it into a lab course or seminar, and which type of incorporation works best in your opinion? Which challenges, do you have already any experience of instructors incorporating the work, and what for challenges do they face then?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I mean, ideally, CREP can be implemented in anything from an intro psych class to a master's thesis. We've never had anybody do it in an intro psych class, but so the earliest I think in the curriculum people have done it is a 200 level stats or methods. Those types of classes I think do require a lot of scaffolding and a lot of like I kind of see myself as the project manager when I do those. Those classes are I do the IRB paperwork. I do things together with them as a group. With both of my classes this semester, I have one grad and one undergrad. But the grad is a master's level counseling. We're like mostly counseling psychology. And so it's sort of similar in some ways. So like the students who are in there have often the same background. And so for both of those, like I prepared the materials on SOCI survey. Those are the types of things that I think are important to do with those 200 level classes, like more guidance, more of like the technical expertise. Otherwise, it's just an awful lot of supervision. And you may have a class where lots of people are interested in learning those skills and have lots of free time. You may have a class where, you know, that's not the case. And so you don't always want to depend on having, you know, little student project managers on each of these. You know, and the master's thesis would be more one-on-one. When students do theses in my lab, undergrads, I let them do replications as their project. Master's students, I do require them to form extension hypotheses for their theses, because I want them going that additional step of, okay, here's what the theory says. Here's what the work that's been done since this, like, what are some other things that we can test from this? So, and they don't have to do a CREP replication. They can also replicate. I have another student right now in my lab who's doing replication work on like benevolent and hostile sexism and its effect on job performance, and whether that's, you know, mediated or moderated by sense of belongingness. So none of those are really things that I know that much about, but yeah, I mean, ideally, you know, I kind of agree with that Dan Quintana nature or science or whatever piece where he talks about how, you know, our student thesis projects should be replication projects. I mean, I think you can do this, you know, you can do it I'm doing it in a lab. You can do this in a capstone course where students form these small groups and they can take a little bit more of the leadership in gathering the materials and collecting, you know, setting up, you know, more than the 200 level class did. I think most of the content classes in psychology, we have projects that would be appropriate for. The one that we would kind of struggle with, I think, would probably be biopsychology. We also probably developmental, just because the papers that we've never picked a paper from one of those journals. We don't have, you know, either we don't have the technical expertise or the equipment, or, you know, we don't pick papers where there's longitudinal research or where minors are the participants. So those might be a little bit difficult, but otherwise, I think any social, personality, cognitive, abnormal, even, like we have, you know, some papers that would be sort of tangentially appropriate to abnormal, these could all be done. In my opinion, you know, starting with a smaller group of students is probably a little bit better. So if you have like a standing lab or one student you're mentoring who just really wants to do research, that's a really good place to start with CREP. But we have made all of that work. The challenges that they usually experience are like timeline. IRB is a huge hurdle for people. Thankfully, that hasn't been the case at most schools, but small teaching schools in particular, I think, can take quite a while. And so sometimes I recommend people get IRB stuff done before the semester starts. Maybe having the right resources. So again, like the Cool It All study had MATLAB. And that was a big challenge for people because they didn't have access to MATLAB. So you have to be a little bit familiar with some of these projects, you know, before you pick one or add it to the list of things that people can choose from.
And thank you for your answer. We would also like to ask Jasmine and Amy. So how was the collaboration with CREP set up for you? So you mentioned, I think when it was time to choose your empirical project, that you decided to work with CREP, but maybe you can tell us a bit more detail about that. And also, what was your role in the replication? What did you like the most? And do all students have the exact same roles? Because you mentioned something about the credit system. So it looks like some might be involved more than others. So do some students have some unique goals?
So for me personally, so I guess I'll start with, I guess how it starts out. So last semester, she did mention a couple of times that we would be doing like a study together as a class. And then this semester, like right when it started, you know, she just reminded us like we're going to be doing a replication study this semester. She gave us like this, I actually think it was 8 different ones, 7 or 8 different options.
Can I just ask for clarification? When you say she, do you mean Dr. Waggy or someone else?
Yes, I'm sorry, Dr. Waggy, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
also for more clarification, so this was a 2-parter. So this was Dr. Waggy set it up one semester or quarter, and then following, that's when I just immediately left off. So like, was this a part 1, part 2?
Well, so like I said, this was for the course that Dr. Waggy teaches, it's Stats and Methods 1 and Stats and Methods 2. So for the fall semester, we were in Stats and Methods 1, which is when we did the literature review. She mentioned it a couple of times that, you know, we would be taking it a little bit further next semester. And then for the spring semester in Stats and Methods 2 is when Dr. Waggy said that, you know, it was time for us to kind of dive into this replication. So she gave us about 7 or 8 options, and we went through every single study, what they were, what that would look like for us doing, any, you know, potential problems that we would have, you know, like, oh, this one has 4 conditions, therefore we would need, you know, an X amount of participants, and, you know, which psychological research is, you know, participants, how to get them is, you know, a problem everywhere. And so after that, then I believe it was, we each got 150 points, or was it 200? Do you remember, Amy? I guess it really doesn't matter. And she actually allowed us to divide, if we say like there was 2 or 3 studies that we liked, we were able to divide up our points. And then I think there's like about 20 people in our class. And then, so we all voted and that's how we chose. For me personally, because I am doing a senior thesis, what I wanted to do was kind of contribute as much as I could handle to this CREP study. So me personally, I did do the recording of actually going through the study. So after we got it all set up, I recorded a video of me doing the study to upload to our Open Science page. So that was, I guess, my extra contribution that I made for the project.
Right now, I kind of wanted to touch about something you said previously. And it was like a really quick, really fast thing that you mentioned, but the idea that you had recently got a grant, and I believe this was the National Science Foundation grant, to help fund, evaluate, enhance the activities of the organization. So one, NSF grant, congratulations. They're not easy to get. But I guess this is more of like a future orientation question of, with this money, with future, hopefully, finances and funding of the organization, where do you see CREP going? Where do you see it expanding? Like what is the future? What is the mission?
So the money that we're using now is to actually like do research on CREP and on the learning outcomes, which has been really nice. We right now have a couple classes at different universities that are doing pre and post testing. And we're going to keep doing that for the next couple rounds. We also are doing a peer mentor system. Actually just sent Jasmine and Amy the application for this.
I already applied.
Nice. It's open for students who have participated in CREP or been involved in CREP in some way. And they get, it's around 6 hours of work a week for the next academic year. And it's, they get a stipend with it. I think it's $1,000 or $1,500. And then, so they will help like mentor and have like office hours for students around the world. They'll lead these things. They'll help mentor students who are completing projects and be there as a resource to answer questions. Sometimes students feel a lot more comfortable asking other students their questions, and they feel like I don't want to bother, a professor somewhere. Like you're not, but if you feel more comfortable asking a student question, great. And then we'll also take them, those peer mentors, we will also take them to NCREP next year, which is in Long Beach. So if anybody's interested in applying for this, follow, go to our Twitter, go to our webpage where we have links to all of this. We are funding a summer conference for students who participate in CREP research. We're looking for, so if you've ever been in a CREP project, I encourage you to submit something. It'll be on, it's free. It'll be on Zoom with GatherTown, and students can present posters, or they can just kind of come and look around. If you've never given a poster presentation, we actually will have some resources on how to prepare posters available, hopefully soon. We have to work on that. And there will also be like a career panel as part of that. And we are funding a submission system that Erin Buchanan is helping us build. So that's been really good. We have a second grant for conference or workshop that we were just awarded. I'm a co-PI on, and my colleague Jared Branch is the PI on it. And this is for instructors who are interested in using CREP, even if you've used it before. There are a series of Zoom workshops over the summer that we also will pay people to come to. I think the stipend for that is $1,000. And they're like 4 Wednesdays from 10 to 2 US Central Time over the summer. And then 2 weeks where you just have individual meetings with the folks who are leading it, which is me, Jared Branch, and Mark Brandt. And so that I think will be really helpful in sort of getting people to incorporate CREP, but also building out materials that other people can use. So the podcast Psych Sessions has agreed to let us record it and post it on their Psych Sessions platform, which so other people will be able to use it in the future. But then also a couple things we really hope to come out of that. We are going to have one of those sessions is going to be dedicated to mentoring students in extension hypotheses and replications, specifically DEIA related extension hypotheses, meaningfully engaging with DEIA extension hypotheses. So we're going to bring in some guest speakers. And then the last session will be like a hackathon style thing where we're all working on building teaching materials that people can use in the future. I think the next steps after that are really going to be teaching materials, more research and evaluation, and more resources for students. I mean, really the spirit of CREP is just bringing everybody along, giving the opportunity, not giving the opportunity, that sounds cheesy, but like at least inviting everybody into the research process. So I think one of the most attractive things about it is that it is a real research. It's an authentic research experience that students get. They are contributing to the field. They are doing something that is real, genuine research. They are engaged as scholars. Whether they love that or not, that's something we want all students to have an opportunity to do. So we want them to have an opportunity to contribute to research and to be scholars. And I think that's sort of where the future is for our profession, but also, you know, for CREP, like how can we engage students in more meaningful professional development, so that, you know, I guess more people can fit on the elevator, you know, the metaphorical elevator that is ideally going up and not down.
Yeah, so I think you already covered a bit of my question, but I'll ask it again anyway. So what is the best way to keep updated with the results of your conducted replications? So how can we keep updated with what CREP does? And also, is there, for example, a sort of metadata or something like that, containing all replications and the results?
That's a great wish list item. And I'm, by the way, like, I'm gathering wish list items right now of like what people would find most useful for this to try to figure out how to prioritize my time. Twitter, sadly, I have been updating people on Twitter. My one of the things I failed to mention when I talked about the grant is that the grant is also funding a part-time employee, Holly France, who is phenomenal, and she's been running the Twitter. So whenever we have a new publication or something like that, I tweet about it. And yeah, and I'll update through that. I'm working on getting the website a little bit better. It's just a matter of, you know, we have one 20-hour-a-week employee and she's got her hands full with the grant, and I'm, you know, teaching a however many load. So, you know, it's a good call for volunteers if anybody wants to help set any of this stuff up. And there are lots of places where people can plug in besides, you know, things like this. Like, we always need reviewers, and we're paying people $10 a review.
And, you know, as we wrap up this interview, I guess as we talked about the future and like things that we can do, I'm sure that you've learned a lot through this process of now being the executive director. And so, like, I'm not sure for you as like a personal development of, have you learned anything yourself that was surprising, Dr. Waggy, about like teaching open science now that you've kind of been involved with CREP so much? Of like, was there personal development there? The teaching aspects, do you have tips for instructors or educators who would like to incorporate even just open science generally into their teaching and mentoring? So like, if you were to like lessons learned, like what would you want to share with educators?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of like a weird case, probably. Like, I don't really feel like I have to do everything perfectly to be doing it, you know, at least within teaching. You know, I think I had like a little bit of this in grad school that I had to get over, where I'm like, okay, in order to get out of graduate school, I have to finish my dissertation, which means I can't want it to be perfect. So I would say, you know, don't worry about doing everything. Do what you can, see how it can help you. It's a great community. So I think don't be afraid to reach out and, and ask people, what they're doing in their classes, ask people for support. I think the most surprising thing to me about the replication stuff is just how into it students get. I was really worried that it would feel forced, like these are the projects you're going to be picking from, and it seems like, I don't have data to support this, but it seems like they are just as interested in these topics as they are their own topics. Which, as I tell them, I'm like, no matter what topic you have, you're probably going to hate it by the time you finish your project. There's that, like, I just submitted it could be like your life's mission to work on a specific topic, but right before you hit that submit button, you're gonna hate it, maybe. I think being involved in things like SIPs and FORRT, and just being on Twitter and seeing what people are saying and doing about this, I think are really nice. And I guess my biggest tip is just reach out whenever you have a question, because if somebody else has probably thought it through, and if they haven't, like, one of my favorite parts of my job is Zooming with people one-on-one and helping them troubleshoot, how this is what I want to accomplish in my class. How can I do that with CREP?
Yeah, I just want to take time to thank each of you again, Dr. Waggy, Jasmine, Amy. It's an hour and a half in the morning that you really spent some time with us, answering questions that a lot of the community, they submitted, getting people hopefully excited and about CREP. And yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. And I just wanted to thank you all one more time for joining us.
Thank you so much.
I would like to thank you again too. So yeah, it's been really insightful.
Nice.
Well, I hope our paths cross again.
Definitely. And then for those listeners, we will be providing contact information, social media. Jasmine, Amy, if you also have your personal websites, we would love to include that as well. Hey, you're showing up, you're providing service, you're going above and beyond, and we really just are excited to spotlight y'all. With that being said, I'm going to wrap up the recording, and I hope anyone who's listening has an amazing day.